Hello, good evening. It is such an honor to have somebody as famous and as distinguished as architect Jimmy Lim with us today.
Jimmy Chiok Siang Lim is the principal of Jimmy Lim Designs, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Penang born, he was sent to Sydney, Australia to complete his education and study architecture at University of New South Wales. He refers to this as his first stage of the globalization process, learning from the West. After rejecting a job offer from the National University of Singapore to be on the design team for the Kent Ridge New Campus project, he returned to Kuala Lumpur in November 72 to join a local architectural firm to pioneer the design of the first semiconductor plant in Malaysia. This was his second stage of the globalization process, applying what he had learned to the home environment. In 1973, he was appointed an associate director of the Project Architect until 1978, when he started his own architectural practice, CSL Associates, in Kuala Lumpur. While at Project Architect, he was responsible for the Indonesian Embassy, PG Pusat Sivek, Motorola, Semiconductor, and the former Citibank headquarters, Wisma Maran. Since returning to Malaysia, has been an active member of PAM, that is the Malaysian Institute of Architects, and its activities. He is a past president of PAM, a founder member of the Badan Warisan Malaysia Heritage of Malaysia Trust, and was president of the Sahabat Warisan, the Friends of Heritage. His work is internationally renowned and recognized for his equatorial tropical architecture, an architecture which is sometimes uncompromising and unconventional. They explore and celebrate the rights of the tropics that challenges current trends. It is typified by his architecture without walls, when he promotes the delineation of floors, exploding of walls, and the use of multi-layered roofs for improving natural ventilation, a bold statement of his energy-efficient tropical architectural expressions. Some of his more notable buildings are the Wallion House, Schneider House, Quek House, Salinger House, Impiana Resort, Awana Resort, and the Prudential Building, formerly the Pacific Bank. He has won numerous awards for architectural excellence: PAM House Award, PAM Building Awards, Commonwealth Associations of Architects Award, Norway Award, Alumni University NSW Award, including the coveted Aga Khan Award in 1998. He lectures extensively and was invited to be an adjunct professor to School of Architecture at the Curtin University of Technology, Western Australia, University of Tasmania, and the International Islamic University, Malaysia.
So, when you say I've had two stages of globalization in my life, what exactly do you mean by these two stages?
Well, the first stage is you go overseas to be educated, and after education, the first stage, that's the first stage of globalization. You learn from the world, and after that, you come back and you practice what you've learned, and that becomes the second stage of globalization, and that's the application of what you've learned back home. That's what I meant by the.
Okay, so how distinctly different were they? When you went to Australia, I mean, it was a very different culture. It was a different, way of life, way of learning. The spirit and the attitude towards work was different. How different was it to kind of what you learned in Australia towards what you actually came back home and then tried to implement? Were there challenges there?
You see, when I left for Australia, we were only 3 years into independence from the British. 1957. 57, yes. I left at the end of 1959, arriving in Sydney in early January 1960. And so this was quite an interesting time in the Malayan history. There was no Malaysia. I was a Malaysian, born under the British flag. in the Straits settlement of Penang. Uh, in those days, the education were okay, but we did not have enough universities and things like that. I suppose my mother and my father thought that they should send me off to be educated somewhere else, although my grandparents would have preferred if I stayed back in Penang. So
Okay.
that was it. So that was the process of acquisition of knowledge, right? You acquire knowledge, then having acquired the knowledge, you consolidate the knowledge into yourself, understanding what is it that you've learned. Then, having learned something, you then apply knowledge application. So these are the three stages of one's self education.
Oh, that's just so wonderful. I know for sure you have this, graph or a chart where you actually explain this knowledge acquisition part, which is actually in your life you call the first stage of globalization. So, is this the chart that you can explain to us? What exactly is this? And
Okay.
you've also talked about, the invisible intellectual.
Yes, I see. Invisible intellectual ceiling.
Yes.
Let me explain what invisible intellectual ceiling is. You see,
Okay.
uh, we acquire knowledge, and it comes to a point when we say, oh, okay, I've attained secondary education. So at that point of time, you get it into your head that fantastic, I'm now secondary educated.
Mhm.
Then, if you go on to university, undergraduate, you go into tertiary education, you get a bachelor's degree. So a lot of people say, oh, well, I've got bachelor's degree, that's great. So I carry on in life at that level, as my cursor is showing. And over a period of time, you then start to slide down, right? And as you slide down, you go into mediocrity. So what is very important is I make sure that at every stage of my career,
Mhm.
when I'm at the point of tertiary where I graduated, at that point I move my x and the y axis up to this point, and I make this zero. So in other words, every time you attain something,
Mhm.
you assume that's a zero. So you attain that, you come up, so you move your 0 point there. So from there you move up again. All right. So you
Okay.
keep moving and you keep moving, and
Okay.
that's how you go. So what the graph I produce here is to show, if you were to be studying, you get your bachelor's, undergraduate, then you get a master's degree, then you get a PhD. So
Mhm.
a lot of people, when they attain the PhD,
Mhm.
they assume that they have achieved great knowledge,
Right.
and from there it's just a whole series of downhill slide, because
Right.
they never revisit what they have attained. And
Okay.
that is what I call the invisible intellectual ceiling. And we must break that invisible intellectual ceiling.
At what stage does that usually happen, the invisible intellectual ceiling, in terms of our age graph?
Well, I think for us designers, uh, at every stage of our project, whatever projects that you're working on,
Mhm.
when you feel that you have broken through some uh, boundaries, you
Mhm.
have to, at that point, shift your x and the y axis back to that point to push yourself up and say, what's the next point of attainment that I
Mhm.
want to achieve? And so you go on. Because I think there was one other chart that I gave you that showed various different projects at different stages of the years. Uh, and you could see how from 1975
Mhm.
right up to 2018.
This is basically to keep us grounded, right? To keep on bringing us back into that zero phase, keep
Yes.
us grounded, so that the mediocrity element doesn't kick in into our growth process. Is this what it is all about?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very
it's very
important.
important.
Very important not to get yourself rooted in mediocrity, because when you get to a level of comfort zone, where a lot of designers fall into that trap, that,
Mhm.
oh, I have attained certain level, I'm
Mhm.
there. I'm the hottest shit, and that's it. But
Yeah.
I think we have to say, hey, I have achieved this position, but I'm going to move the 0 point up to where I've attained, so that
Okay.
what you have achieved up to that point becomes zero again. So
Okay.
since it's at zero again, then you must strive to go up some more. When from zero, you have to go up. Then you move your points up again, and that's how it
You
works.
know, yeah, absolutely. We realize it. I'm, as a designer myself, as an interior designer, I've realized that, after having attained maybe some success with some projects, and I've seen other creative people in other industries like fashion and even architecture, of course, people tend to get too complacent or even sometimes very egoistic after having achieved certain things. I think if one has to keep this particular thing always in mind about trying to get back to zeros, and it's not about your qualifications or your achievements,
No.
because it is said that you're as good as your last project, anyways.
Yep.
So I think reinventing oneself at all times, and building up one's intellectual being, I think possibly gets to be the most important and the critical thing, and that is was I think your secret mantra. I think for your success, and there's a lot to learn from this, I'm sure, and follow this, and I'm sure all those listening to this will greatly learn from this, because this needs to be applied across broader, no matter which creative field one belongs to. You, of course, is the master of architecture, particularly when it comes to heritage and when it comes to conservation and all of that. So what is this romance that you have, Jimmy, with heritage and conservation, and
Well,
relevant in today's time?
you use the term master architect. That got me into a lot of trouble many
Really?
years ago, because I was approached by MasterCard to do an advertisement, to
Okay.
advertise MasterCard.
Uh-huh.
And because of that, the Malaysian Board of Architects took me to task.
Okay.
Yeah, because they first charged me for advertising. But when I
Oh.
told them, I said, how was I advertising? I
Mhm.
appeared in an advertisement, but I did not advertise. All right.
Right.
So later on, they changed the charge from advertising to one which they call uh, conduct, which, in the opinion of the board,
Uh-huh.
is, is disgraceful or infamous. Now,
Okay.
that says nothing. But when they want to get you, they will get you. So what do? You just go along and let them be. So,
So how to handle these challenges?
huh?
Currently, we've got the pandemic and people are breaking down. But one sees your life, like this Mastercard issue. There have been so many other issues that you're forever in news.
Yeah.
But it looks like you kind of, sail through all of this and still come out strong. What is the secret sauce here? How do you get out of it? And how do you come out strong every time?
Well, I always tell people, jokingly, you actually have to be a bit stupid. You got to be a bit thick in the head. Why?
Okay.
Because when you are thick in the head, then you don't mind banging your head against the wall all the time, fighting with people, barging at them. So maybe that's the thing with me. No, but on a serious note, I believe that life is always a challenge.
Okay.
You know, there are three things that are preordained in life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the when something that's bound to happen, it
Mm-hmm.
will happen, and the people you will meet who will help you, who be who help you, who move you on, that's all predetermined, preordained. And then events that going to happen will happen regardless of whatever it is. All right. And the fourth point for me is, when anything happen in your life, you've got to move on. You don't think about it, you don't sweat about it, you don't worry about it. I mean, in the year 2004, my office was burned down to the ground when I
Okay.
was when I
Okay.
was in Zanzibar on
Mm-hmm.
an assignment for the Aga Khan. I
Mm-hmm.
received a phone call at 8:30 Zanzibar time in the morning from my sister saying that your office burned down.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
So anyway, cut a long story short, the fire started on the 4th of April, 2004. So if you write the date in Chinese, it's 040404.
Okay.
And the word four in Chinese sounds like death.
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 Okay.
Four in Cantonese is say. Death in Cantonese is say. So in all the different dialects, it all sounds the same. In
Okay.
in Mandarin, die is 死, four is 死. So if you say, oh death, oh death, oh death, so the date was predestined. So what was the message I'm getting from the Supreme Being? So I think these are things that you can't tell. It was all written to happen, and it
But,
happened.
but even though there is a certain focus on destiny, don't you think a lot of hard work, a lot of focus, a lot of goal setting is really required?
Oh, of course. Oh, nothing comes easy. Nothing comes easy. You've got to go for it. See, like in architecture, as a designer, as an imagineer, as a conceptioneer, it's 95% hard work and 5% good luck. Right?
Okay. So you focused on the 95% at all times.
Always.
And that 95% has really got you the coveted Aga Khan Award amongst a lot of other awards that is there under your belt. Jimmy, I'm sure myself and a lot of the audience would love to learn more about how you got this coveted Aga Khan Award, particularly for the Salinger House, which is such a beautiful property that was made so many 2 decades ago. However, has its own unique character. Tell us a little more about it, especially when I believe the jury was Zaha Hadid.
Yes. When we were commissioned to do this project, it was just the client was a couple, both Mr. and Mrs. Salinger, and they told me, say, we are very simple people, and our needs are very simple. So whenever anyone tells you they're simple, my alarm bell goes, oh, you got to watch out,
Life can get complicated.
Yeah, they have sorted out all the complication to make it easy.
Okay.
So when we approach this design, we just approach it the way we would at any time, looking at the structural system, look at the function of the house, the need of those people. The most important thing is the relationship of, how the spaces should work and all that. And based on that, we ended up coming up with the triangular matrix. And we ended up with two triangles, one triangle pointing one direction, the other triangle pointing the other direction. And I was often asked, why is it you got this two triangles pointing different directions? Well, Mr. Salinger was a Canadian, and being a Westerner, they are very much into the Malay tradition, Malay culture, and all that. And he's married to a Malay lady, and the wife Monira, who was local Malay, like all Malaysians, they all aspire for whatever that's from the West. So when the idea of designing something that reflects a lot of the Malay identity and culture, she was saying, no, I want a modern house. So that became a good point for me to start. Both of them looking in two different directions, hence the two different triangles.
I hope they had the same bedroom or two different bedrooms on two different directions.
Oh, no, they are in the same bedroom. So that was how the shape came about.
Okay.
And the use of timber was was just one of those things that I proposed. But what was most fortuitous was that we were able to get this Malay carpenter, Pak Adam, to do
Before we talk about Pak Adam, just give me a moment. Let me show the audience the woodwork that was used, in this project. And tell us a little more about it. What wood was this in? What was the structure all about? How did
Uh,
you use these rafters? Tell us a little more about this.
well, the wood that we use is called chengao. Chengao was traditionally used for boat building. It was very dense, was very heavy, very durable. So
Okay.
all those wooden boats that you see around in Malaya, they were all made from chengao.
Okay.
So, so this carpenter, Park Adam, he was a remarkable person. He was remarkable because he had one hand and he had only one eye. You know,
Okay.
he lost both his hand and his eyes in a fishing accident. You know, the people in the rural area, they used to use dynamite to
Mm-hmm.
do dynamite fishing. And I think something have happened one day and the dynamite blew off his hand. So you see,
Oh,
you'll
okay.
notice he hasn't got any right hand. He hasn't
Mm-hmm.
got any right hand and
Okay.
he's blind in the left eye. Right?
Okay.
So see at the award ceremony, the Aga Khan gave him the certificate. I had to be there to help him so I can take the certificate from him so that he
Okay.
can shake
Wonderful.
with his left hand with the Aga Khan.
Okay. Okay. So tell us more about it. How did you discover Park Adam with one hand and one eye? How did he translate something as complicated as your design to reality?
No, you see, I said that he was remarkable because uh, now when we were looking for a carpenter, uh, the Salinger Rudin, he was called Richard before. From Richard, he became Rudin, short
Okay.
for Shahrudin. So
Mm-hmm.
Rudin,
Mm-hmm.
because of his wife's connection, was able to, through friends, locate this carpenter from the northern state of Kelantan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's the traditional craftsmen, they would be a carpenter for part of the day, and part of the time he was a farmer, and part of the time he was a rice grower. This is a little bit like what you have in the Indian culture. You get the guy, the farmer, who has
Mm-hmm.
one cow and 1 acre of land. So he's a farmer in the morning. Uh, if harvest the fruits, clean up the thing, feed the cow with all the leftover thing. Then he takes the fruits and what have you, or the fishes from the pond. He goes to
Yes.
the market, sells his fruit, sells his fishes until about 12 o'clock. And at 1 o'clock, he packs up and goes off and works as a carpenter, making tools, for the kitchen, cookware and what have you, until about 4, 5 o'clock. Then he goes home, have a meal, and then at 5 o'clock he takes his hair cutting set and goes off and be a hair cutter for until about 7 p.m. So you
Oh
see,
my,
a very
everything,
system.
yes, various things he can do. So Park Adam was something like that, is
It
it?
was something like that. Now the person I just described for you was a guy I met in architect Suresh Berry's house in Kolhapur when I visited many years ago. The
Oh,
guy who was looking after his house was doing just that. And that's how I learned about it.
okay, wonderful. So you had a fantastic experience with architect Suresh Berry in Kolhapur, am I correct?
Yes,
And
Kolhapur.
this is the kind of a sustainable livelihood
That's
that
right. Yes.
that you have learned in India.
Yeah. And then he's got one cow, one
Okay.
acre of land. And from the one cow, the cow is a vacuum cleaner, eats all the vegetable and all the things from the farm. And when
Okay.
it produces a cow dung, so whatever that they used to wipe on the walls and what have you, what's left over they put into the biomass to
Mhm.
produce methane gas that's used for cooking, for heating up the water and what have you. So you have a very well balanced ecosystem, which India is so advanced in terms of sustainable, environmental friendly practices that more of your designers and architects should revisit some of your values.
So
You,
beautifully put, Jimmy. But why is there so much focus now that if you come and see the architectural projects in India, and you've done something in Gujarat too, there's so much focus on getting the LEEDs rating and this rating and all kinds of green building rating. Tell us a little. What is your take on this?
well, forgive me if I sound a bit rude. I think the architecture in India has all been spoiled by one man. He's the guy who designed Chandigarh
Oh, okay.
about 60 years ago. And
Okay.
after that, every Indian architect tries to be like him.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that's the problem.
Okay.
So
So,
you have to, the Indian designers have to break away from that tradition. You see,
mhm,
you must go back to your past to look at your past in order for you to move forward to the future.
mhm,
Like what I always say, today was yesterday's tomorrow, just as
mhm.
today will be tomorrow's yesterday, right?
Beautiful. Okay.
So we don't think of us today, you know, being what it is and try to emulate what tomorrow is going to be. Because by the time tomorrow comes, they will be
Mhm.
looking at what we are today as yesterday. So, so in order to keep a straight line, you must always go back to your heritage in order to go forward. And
Okay.
India has that. You've got such a wonderful cultural, what do you call,
Heritage.
estate
Yes.
heritage. The national asset, the national estate
Absolutely.
is absolutely amazing. Amazing.
Yes. It's so rich and it's so deep rooted.
Absolutely.
And seriously, and we are all extremely, extremely proud of it because I think the whole world looks at our heritage and there's so much to learn from our heritage.
Absolutely. And this is where your architectural training of the student must revert back to
Mhm.
look at the way you constructed things, the way your structures were made, and things like that. I mean, you look at some of the stone structures at Fatipusi Creek.
Mhm.
You know the way the the the, the red sandstone slabs cantilevered out, the way you had the cobbling system, you know, from a column to support the beams, you know, and all that. I mean, when you look at what Fatipur Sikri had, you almost get a feeling that the stones were so light that they were floating up.
An
You-
architectural wonder, absolutely. I mean, so one can visit and revisit and keep on learning from just that one structure, like you mentioned, Fatehpur
yes,
Sikri. We have
yes.
several tucked in every nook and corner of our country, and every structure, every building looks so unique and so beautiful. Coming back to what you said about connecting yesterday, today, and tomorrow, Jimmy,
Yes.
20 years after you made the Salinger House, for which you got the Aga Khan Award,
Mm.
you made the Leisure Farm Villa. 20 years hence, when you made the leisure farm villa,
Yes.
when you look at it,
Yes.
which you can see now on the screen, it has similar design sensibilities. Tell us more about it. Where does this connection and how is it looking so much similar yet so fresh and so unique?
Well, you know, the Salinger, Rudin, when at that time he was the professor of physics at a local university.
Mhm.
The house in Leisure Farm, the owner, he was the president of the National University of Singapore,
Mhm.
also in education. Both he and his wife, they have no children. In fact, both the requirements for Salinger and the project in Leisure Farm were identical. All their requirements were identical. They wanted a house as a weekender away from their townhouse. So of course, when I looked at that, you know, I mean, I dare say most designers would say, this is almost the same as a Salinger's house. Why don't I just use the same design, do a bit of titivating, tart it up a bit, change the elevation a bit, and voila, that's it, you know. But
And I'm sure they loved it. It is, but how is it that the same design tenets were still so much applicable 2 decades later? Were you ahead of your time during the Salinger House, or is it that old is gold and the kind of designing you do even 20 years from now, it will still remain unique and fresh?
well, you see, the thing is this: I think when the Salinger's house was done, it was ahead of its time. And this present house, I mean, although the requirements are the same, but if you look at the plans, they are totally different. But yet there are similarities, right? So there
Mhm.
is similarity, but yet different. See, first of all, this time I did not use timber. I used steel. All
Okay.
the structural components were steel, and
Okay.
I used concrete, steel and concrete. No
Okay.
brick, no timber, except for the flooring. I use timber. And
Mhm.
also, the client are Singaporeans. And Singaporeans, being a modern city, would not think of having a wooden house because, it's not right. So we ended up achieving what we have. We've kept to the principles of similar circulation diagram, but we ensure that the whole structural manifestation is quite different. And that's what we have. So in that respect, we are quite pleased with ourselves. And and if you were to analyze this second house, you'll find that a lot of the structural techniques that we employ are quite different from what we have ever done before.
So you have been experimenting, right? So even in this one, like in the Salinger house, you experimented,
Yes,
and you got somebody like a Pac Adam who apparently told you that if you can draw it, I
he
can make
can
it.
build exactly. Yes,
Yes.
yes,
So that was experimentation 20 years ago. You have continued to experiment, and now with this leisure farmhouse, you have again experimented, as you mentioned, with some newer materials and everything else.
yes.
But tell me something: when we see our newer generations, we have often mentioned that our lives are ruled by the knowledge that we acquire more from Google than from textbooks and college curriculums. Where are we heading with this mentality? Where is the challenge and the experimentation attitude?
uh, it's very hard to say. Whilst there is a tendency, I must admit that I've been very fortunate that I've seen among a lot of our students here, local students, a certain amount of energy. And a lot of the students are now beginning to realize that what they are not being taught in school, right? But then, unfortunately, the whole society, the whole world, have been sort of captured into everything has to be computerized. Now, what is very interesting is this: uh, the word computer in Chinese is referred to as 电脑. 电 in Chinese is electric.
Okay.
Now is brain. So the Chinese refers to the computer as an electric brain.
Mhm.
So in order to get and encourage students to
Mhm.
think and work and excel themselves, I
Mhm.
ask them, do you have a now? Do you have a brain? The answer is yes, I have a brain. I said, do you need a 电 to your now? That means, do you need the
Electric.
electricity to your brain?
Okay.
So of course, when I say that, I get a shocked look. Oh,
What are we talking about?
oh, suddenly what, why? Because 电 now becomes computer, right?
Okay.
So of course, the answer is no. I say, so you don't need the 电 to your now. So therefore, use your brain instead of relying on the electric brain, the computer, and whatever restrictions the software and the programs can give you.
But Jimmy, in spite of all the electronic knowledge and all the computers and everything, when it comes back to the curriculums in our college, schools and colleges, where are we heading? I mean, the computer teaches you something completely different because you surf the Google. But
Mm.
when it comes to your back to your college, there is a complete disconnect there. How do
Yes.
you explain that?
Huh? Uh, the, 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 the explanation is very simple. India and Malaysia, we were all part of the British Commonwealth, just as in Australia, where I was educated. Now,
Mhm.
our whole architectural education had been based on the CEAM or something, the Commonwealth Architectural Education Committee, right? And they used to come out to accredit our universities to follow the program. Now, we are now in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
We are 100 years after the setting up of the Bauhaus. Bauhaus, I think, was set up in about 1918, 1920,
Right.
because 2 years ago, in 2019, they
Mm-hmm.
celebrated their 100th anniversary, and there was a big celebration in Singapore. The
Mm-hmm.
German, brought all their cultural group up to Singapore to celebrate 100 years. Now, when you stop and think, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we are now 100 years since the setting of Bauhaus, and we are still following the same old program of education that was started by the RIBA back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Right? you know, but in the 1960s, when I was studying, we studied more subjects. We used to study 9 subjects a week. We
Mm-hmm.
used to study construction, structures, uh, specification, science, materials, all sorts of things. And they were intensive. But today, you find that the universities are not teaching things like history, structures, what called construction, all that. So how are you going to design? Basically, one of the tests that I give a lot of the students is, I say, you are a designer. You're all talking about design, design. Whoa, we are great designers. Okay, design me a cube that is 25 mm by 25 mm by 25 mm. That's
Mm-hmm.
about an inch by inch by inch. Very
Mm-hmm.
simple. Get a piece of wood, you cut or make a little paper box or whatever. It's very simple, right? Now,
Right.
make the same cube, but this time make it 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter. It's getting a bit bigger. So to spend 2.5 meter, you need to know a little bit of structures. To spend 2.5 meter or 2.5, you got to know what material you can use that would support itself. Okay, so a
True.
different set of problems. Then the designer said, oh, then they start to scratch their head. I said, no, your headache is not over yet. Now design me a cube that's 25 meter by 25 meter by 25 meter. That's when their jaws drop. You know? So when you talk about 25 meter by 25 meter, you're talking about a structure that's about 8 or 9 stories high.
Right. So I think it's just so important. Yes, please go ahead. I mean, it's really, really important to understand not just your subject, but all the allied subjects that go to make a particular project or a product, viable. So
So
yes, please go.
that's the thing, uh, you just have to know what you're talking about. But
So
then,
Mhm.
following the old British systems, whenever you make working drawings, you draw on your working, you draw 2 vertical lines, and you write down there, RC column to engineer's detail. You put an arrow to the 2 lines. That's it. Finish. Leave the end to the engineer. All right. Then you draw 2 horizontal lines.
Uh-huh.
You write RC beams to engineer's detail. You put an arrow up there. That's it. Finish.
So your job is over.
Your
So
job's over. Leave it to the engineer. So that's
the other guy,
yeah,
you pass the buck.
yeah,
So for
pass the
you,
buck.
you think,
So but then you see, as a designer, designing the column, designing the beam, how you connect these 2 together to create a celebration, how have fun. That's the fun, right? So
yes,
why do you give the fun part to an engineer who don't even appreciate what it's all about? All
I
right.
think that is only possible, Jimmy, when one goes into the depth of the whole project. You eat, think, sense the project, and it becomes like you become an intrinsic part of that project. It's only then I think the success story comes. I think it's very important for all of us to imbibe that attitude. I think it's more than knowledge, it's an attitude issue to my mind. What do you think,
Well,
Jimmy?
it's the mindset, it's the passion, it's
Okay.
the desire to do something, and it's a desire to break through the IIC.
Okay. So we are back to that IIC, the
Yeah.
mediocrity that we keep falling into. I think excellence is only possible when we are completely soaked into the passion of that particular whatever we are doing.
Hmm.
Is that
Okay.
how the success stories would happen?
Yes.
Your inside out story, what is it? You say it's good to design inside out.
Well, insight has everything to do with how people live, how people do things, how the comfort is, the light coming in, the breeze coming in, and to be able to look out into the distance and see the layering of your vision. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And you enjoy that. And we got to think of the function. You see, it reminds me of a conversation I had with Mrs. Surabai Bali or something. She was the wife of the mayor of Ahmedabad,
Okay.
who invited Corbusier to Ahmedabad, and they had a house design by Corbusier. And when Corbusier presented the model and the drawing and asked showed to her, she asked him, said, "Where's my kitchen?" And Corbusier looked at her, "Oh, your kitchen will be outside." And she said, "How can my kitchen be outside when it should all be inside?" And she didn't think very much of Corbusier, but never mind. That's another story, right? So you have to start from the inside out.
Mhm.
And I always ask my students and architect friends who are so concerned about the looks of the building that I say, how many of your clients rushes home every evening and at 6 o'clock takes his favorite armchair, like my armchair here, across the street, sits out in front of the street with his gin and tonic and look at his house and say, "Oh, I love the window. Oh, I love the color trim on the fascia. Oh, I like those vertical lines that accentuate the verticality." How many of them do that? I think if you have a client who does that, all the neighbors are going to shake their head and say, "Oh, the poor man. After dealing with the architect, he's become mad."
I think the architect who designed the building would probably sit outside with a drink, and not the owner of the house for sure.
Well, then they'll say the architect's gone nuts, designing the house.
So I think, as an interior designer, I face this challenge all the time. The building is up, and then the interior guys are called, and all the other stakeholders are called in.
Mm.
I think it's just so important to be able to start the project with all the stakeholders, all the designers, everybody together from the beginning, even before the first nail is hammered.
Yes,
Don't you think so?
yes. You must know everything and design that. In fact, this was a lesson that was taught to me anyway, by the professor in my university.
Mhm.
Years ago, he was a Hungarian professor, Professor George Molnar.
Okay.
And he was a very good cartoonist for the Sydney Morning Herald.
Mhm.
Molnar, Molnar. You can
Okay.
Google him.
Mhm.
It was a wonderful teacher.
Okay. So this is what you learned at a very early stage in your career, in your life.
Well,
I think we are still trying to struggle and learn it. I thank God we managed to speak with you. I think our antennas will be up now, and there is a lot more that we need to learn. How did you apply this principle when you did the house in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad? How did it all happen, and what was your experience working in a project in India?
okay, the house in Gujarat was for a client called Munsho. It was architecture without walls. I worked on this project in collaboration with Kana Patel of
Okay,
Ahmedabad.
okay,
Uh, the, uh, the client was a friend of hers, so she invited me to work on the design. And therefore, what the first thing I did is, as a farmhouse, most farmhouses in India, in Pakistan, are just a replication of a townhouse made smaller. you know. So in this case, I elevated it up above the ground, and we apply a lot of ecologically sustainable environmental thing. See, for example, the pond, which you see here. Oh, there's a pond in front here. This pond was created because there was a depression, and we use this to collect all the wastewater. And so with so much water there, it helps to green the whole environment. And because when the house is elevated up above the ground, we could build a swimming pool very easily. And and then the rest of the house up on the top is just very open. There are no walls. And we've used a lot of the timber. All the timber are recycled timber. And timber over, brick walls and things like that. So it was a good experience.
Okay.
And the walls are all using the local stones that you have there. And so I think it's a different typology of what a farmhouse could be.
Beautiful. I think sustainability to its ultimate. And I'm sure you must have enjoyed working with Kana Patel, who's also a very, very progressive and a very good architect, a young but very promising. And I'm sure we can learn a lot from her experience working with you on this particular project.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Looking forward to so many more projects from you with you, Jimmy, in India. I'm sure a lot of other architects would love to work with you, because with your design sensibilities, your approach to architecture and to heritage particularly, and conservation, it's just so amazing. Every conversation, everything has, I'm sure, will be a huge learning experience. So I think, it's just a very sad that, we've gone through a phase of a pandemic in the past. But I think, to my mind, 2020, even though a lot of people were breaking down and thinking, oh my God, what can we do? And life's coming to an end. I see a lot of others who actually progressed and done better. What is it? What do you think the young millennials, and a large part of the audience today are young, millennials, designers, creative people, creative minds who follow you, we look up to you. What is the message that you want to give to them?
The message is, you just got to live life to the best of your ability. You've got to be honest to yourself, respect the environment, and remember, architecture is not about icons. Architecture is about people. And what are people about? People are about life. Then ask, what's life about? Life is about living. And what's living about? Living is about looking good, feeling good, respecting what nature is giving us, do our best to preserve our nature so that we have something to pass on to the future generation. So ultimately, architecture is all about making people happy, enjoying life, and looking good and feeling good. That's what it is. So as long as we keep to that, I think we'll be okay. Not money. Money is not everything.
Okay. Beautifully put, unbelievably beautifully and simply put. But that is really the bottom line, is to be happy and to be able to spread happiness with whatever we do and whatever we create.
Yes.
And Jimmy, you have spread so much happiness all over the years, through your projects, through your talks, through sharing your knowledge on several platforms. And today, it's just such an amazing experience every time one interacts with you. And I'm sure your team, the designers, architects, contractors, clients are happy souls just by being with you and working with you, Jimmy.
No, not necessary. Their life is quite tough.
I hope your family also says the same thing. Happy to be with you. So this is just so wonderful. I have a lot of questions here now. The audience, I would request them to type it in the chat box so that I can take them one by one. Let me just take the first question which is from Shushma Rao. Jimmy, this says she's a civil engineer, and she says, do you follow Vastu or Feng Shui when you're designing your projects?
Oh yes, you have to. You have to.
Okay.
You have to. We think Vastu or Feng Shui is rubbish. We need to read the 10 books of architecture by Vitruvius. When we were in second year, the 10 books of architecture by Vitruvius was a prescribed reading.
Mhm.
So you read through that, you find that it has everything to do with Vastu, everything to do with Feng Shui.
Okay, okay. So are there clients other than, of course, in India, a lot of people insist on applying Vastu tenets or even Feng Shui tenets. But internationally, since you've done projects all over the world, is there leaning towards applying these principles
Well,
in the
no,
West, particularly?
it all depends on the person. I mean, if you're doing something in Hong Kong or I suppose in China, they will be very, very concerned about Feng Shui.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that sort of thing.
Okay, so the next question is uh, from Dinesh, and he says, "What do you think is the new uh, zero XY coordinate in the current era in terms of design and architecture, where mankind are facing increasing threats from climate change, pandemic, social unrest?"
Can you repeat that again? What do?
You think is the new, 00 XY coordinate in the current era in terms of design and architecture,
Oh,
the coordinate in terms of design and architecture, where mankind is facing increasing threats from climate change, pandemics, and social unrest.
well, I think you you need to uh, look at the thing that you have to do yourself. You know, we cannot talk about what other people does. All right. Now, climate change, we just have to be humble and in our humility, try to work and design within uh, what nature has to give us. Uh, let's not try to be like Bill Gates, who wants to change the world. He wants to play God. He
Mhm.
wants to block the sunlight coming in onto Earth, and he introduced all sorts of polio vaccine to poor children of India, and that caused a lot of harm. And he's involved in producing the current COVID-19 vaccine. You know, all this sort of thing. We don't want to do that. That's beyond us. So I just do what I have to do.
Okay, great. So there is Minali who's asking a question that you introduced the concept of no gutters many years before the Singapore government made it mandatory. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, well, when I first came back from Australia, I suddenly realized that when it rains, the whole place got so bloody wet, you know. I mean, it splashes everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Then the gutters hanging at the edge of the roof
Mm-hmm.
did nothing. The water just came over. So, and then I noticed a lot of gutters are rusted because the downpipes are choked with leaves and what have you. Yeah. So after that, I decided, no, I'm not going to design with gutters because most of our traditional houses never had gutters. So
Mm-hmm.
when I submitted plans to the local authorities, they asked me, where are your gutters and where are your downpipes? I said, no, I don't have. He said, how can? I said, why not? I said, is there a bylaw that says I must have it? You see, so this is why I started to think you have gutters because in England, they don't have heavy rain like us. They have little trickle on the rain. And then at the eave of the roof, it'll drip, drip, drip. It's always dripping, you know, all these little drips. So with all these little drips, you need to have a gutter to collect all the drips. And then from the drips, you then allow it to come down the gutter. Here we don't have drips. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
so
So
so I decided not to do it. So I was then after that I was able to every house I designed with no gutters ever since I started practicing in
that was
78.
decades ago, and now Singapore has made it mandatory, right?
Now Singapore don't allow gutters in any of the houses.
Okay.
No?
Okay. Great. So Awang Wahab, this is the next question. He asks you that if given the chance, is there any previous project that you'd like to redo better or improve upon?
No. You
Okay.
move on. You move on. I
Okay.
think
So you are happy with whatever you have done
yes,
and
you have to.
satisfied.
Yeah.
But tell me, Jimmy, is there a point where you're actually 100% satisfied with the projects that you do?
Uh yes. at every stage of my project, I'm always pleased with what I have achieved. Because as I explained, this is all part of the graft. You know, you attain that level, and that's your point. So before you start to plateau off along your IIC, then so therefore, at every stage, I'm improving. So people ask me, which is your best project? I always tell them the next project should be the best, because
Okay.
at this point, that's the best.
So the best is yet to come. Is that how you look at life, Jimmy?
Always, absolutely.
Wonderful. That is
Friends also. You know, as time goes on, you meet nicer friends.
how wonderful. I hope I fall into that category in the future as you go along. So Manjinder Singh, he's asking a question to you, Jimmy. To
Yes.
save environment, can we go eco-friendly? What, please advise how we can do this.
How we can say? Well, you know, in many of my lectures that I've given in India, I've told the audience, I say, can every one of you, after you've attended my talk, go out and find a plot of land where there are no trees, and every one of you plant a tree. And then the next year you come back and plant another tree and keep planting. Every year you plant one tree. I've said this to quite a number of schools. There was a school I went to in Pune last year. I asked them to start a tree planting club in their school, because the school is set up in an open field site, no trees, lots of dust. I said, why don't you guys form a tree planting club? Start planting trees around your school, so that the next time I visit your school, a whole place will be full of trees. I don't know whether they've done that or not. So
Okay.
that would be one way.
What a beautiful way. My goodness, if all of us were to plant one tree,
A year.
imagine how this whole world will have so many more trees, and the number of people equivalent to the number of trees.
Don't
Can't
talk
get
about
more.
don't talk about the world. Talk about India. You know,
Okay.
India, you used to have a custom that in the villages, that when the son is born, the father goes out and plant a jackfruit tree, so that when the son grows up, when he's 20 years old, the jackfruit tree will be 20 years, will be so big, and in the meantime will produce so many jackfruits. Then if the son decides to get married at 20, he can then, if he wants to chop down the tree and use the wood to build himself a house. And isn't that a fantastic culture? Why aren't Indians doing that now?
Wow, it's just so nice to see that you have studied the Indian culture so much more deeply than I'm sure a lot of people in the audience who are Indian viewers probably don't know about this jackfruit culture.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's so beautiful because you're so right. The jackfruit grows up 20 years hence, it gives fruits.
Oh,
But
yeah, absolutely.
I think it should be done also for the girl child, not the boy child.
Those
That
are
is where I have my
maybe
reservation.
you plant some other trees, you know.
Yeah, I think for a girl child, it should be mandatory to plant at least 6 trees.
Yeah,
She has to be given dowry also in India.
yeah, yeah.
So that is just on a lighter note. I will just take another two questions because we are also running out of time. Sushma asks, which of the cultures in the world do you think is the most sustainable?
Offhand, from what I've seen, I would say Indian is you had, but I'm not
Wow.
sure about now. You
No,
had. So go back to your own culture, okay?
okay, okay.
That's-
Fabulous. So, Sai Charan, this is, I think we should take as the last question. I'm told we are we need to wind up. There are many more questions, which I think we will send you by email, and I'm sure the answers will be given to them. But this is from Sai Charan, who says, was there any time where you were almost completing a project and you had to start all over again? Start over?
No. Whenever I get a difficult client, I walk away from the project. I tell the client, I'm not good enough to do your project. So you should get yourself someone better to do it for you.
Okay.
I've
And
done that very often.
yes, oh wow. But Jimmy, a lot of us and a lot of people cannot afford to let go of a project. Let's be very honest and be, practical. However, I personally feel that understanding the client's needs from the start of the project is very, very critical. Sometimes we don't understand or we don't make that extra effort to understand the client because, after all, the client is a very important stakeholder in the whole business. What do you have to say for this?
Yes. When I was doing fourth year architecture at the university, the, we had a lecturer lecturing us practical professional practice. He was the president of the Royal Australian Institute of Architects, and he was also the president of the New South Wales chapter of the RAIA.
Mm-hmm.
And he told us, he said, always remember, the client is an important person, but the client is also a potential bastard. They're always that he's also a potential bastard.
Okay.
And let me tell you, many of them are.
Okay. I hope Sai Charan is listening. So, how do you deal with it?
Well, you know something, you ask yourself this question: how much money do you need to survive?
Okay.
Do we really need so much more than what we need? How much do we need to survive? You go out and have a meal. All right, I give you a 200 grams steak, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or a bowl of spaghetti. How many plates of spaghetti can you eat? How many 200 grams steak can you eat per meal? What's the cost? So when you add up all these costs, you find that you don't need that much money. So therefore, if you are convinced that you can survive on whatever it is that you have, then you can always turn around to those clients who are bastards and tell them, keep your job, nice to have known you, see you sometime. And
Mm-hmm.
then look at them in the eyes, and you suddenly realize that these guys are nothing but quivering jelly.
Okay, great. But yes, so the moment we are able to understand our need versus greed, when that is sorted out in our own heads, what our needs are over what we think we should underline as greed, I think we are very sorted. Then I think getting the right clients and being authentic with them will, I think, give us the right results. At
Mm.
least I have seen, architects and very, very successful architects like you working on that principle. It has worked with me to a large extent. And, it's a win win situation when we are able to deliver what the client needs and what is not bordering to what we define as our own greed. If our needs can meet our needs, I think it's a win-win
No,
for both of us,
you
both
see,
the stakeholders.
it always comes out as a win-win when you have a client who's enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a little story, a quick story.
Yes,
Now,
go.
many years ago, I was asked to design a house, and went through the whole rigmarole, briefing and all, many proposals, and finally the family accepted the design.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the methodology that I apply, I did not did you know we did not have to do many changes and many different proposals. So I thought, great. They were happy with the layout, they're happy with the design. They say, now I say, okay, can I submit plans? They say, oh no, you can't. Oh, we must consult the feng shui master, the vastu master. If he says okay, then we'll go ahead. So I said, okay, fine. So we met the feng shui master. He went through, he checked the front door, checked the positioning, the sunrise, sunset, where the bedrooms are, the position of the bed, where the bathroom are. Yeah, yeah. Good, good, very good. This house is a very nice house. Everything is good. So I was very relieved. I said, great, we can submit the plans. So next day after the meeting, I got a call from my client. So when I heard, he called me. I was very happy. I said, "Oh, great! He's going to tell me to proceed." So he picked up the phone and said, "Oh, Jimmy, how are you?" I said, "Oh, good, good." So we are all going to ready to submit plans. Oh, no, no, no. Sorry, I have to tell you, my wife was wondering, can you give us a few more design variation?
That sounds familiar.
I said, excuse me? He said, lah, woman, she got. I said, hey, then if that's the case, why didn't you tell me before we meet the feng shui master? All right? Why now that he's gone through everything's okay, now you want me to go back to square one? He said, I can't be helped. I said, okay. Why don't you do it this way? You take this project, get another architect to do it for your wife. Okay? You just pay me for whatever I've done. That's it. I left it and that. Finish.
Mhm.
No time to fight around with people like that. You know,
I think it's not the number of projects that one does, but the quality of the project that one does and the appreciation that one gets, not
yep,
but
absolutely.
from the people who watch that project is so critical for any designer, any architect, anybody in the creative industry to move forward. And that is what we are constantly aspiring for. So the whole idea is to give it your 100%, work for
Yep.
the right kind of people. It is not the numbers, but the quality of project and the quality of the end customer, that is client, that is most critical at this point.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
how I should learn from what you just said, Jimmy?
No, well, no, I mean, that's the way I do it. You must do it your way, because I'm sure, uh, you know, I unfortunately, I am very blunt. I tend to tell people the truth. It's the bad influence I picked up from Australia.
But that has worked very well for you. You've been in the news very often for all the and the wrong reasons, but you stood up for yourself. What is that message you want to give us about what you have been doing with, even though it may be considered a foot in the mouth issue, but what has happened ultimately in the long run? How has it helped you survive?
Well, I don't know. How do I say that? I really don't know. Except that you get yourself into a spot, you got to get yourself out of the spot and capitalize on it. So you got to take advantage of a disadvantage. And but important, in whatever you do, you must have a certain sense of humility. In humility, you understand a lot of the issues, and then you engage yourself in the Tai Chi of architecture,
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
using the energy of your opponent to overcome the opponent.
Fabulous. I think we will end with that, the Tai Chi of architecture, the energy. We can sense that energy from Jimmy Lim, architect. And I think I would have loved to go on with this conversation, but unfortunately for the time, we will probably have to corner him one more time in the future to learn more from him. But thank you for now. And I'm sure, like myself, the audience has enjoyed every bit of this conversation and learned so much from your experiences. We are definitely looking forward to meeting you here in India in person and probably looking at some of your projects that you do with other architects in India and learn from those experiences. Till then, thank you so much once more to you and your team, Jimmy. And of course, a big, big thank you to this lovely audience who has logged in today to listen and learn from you. And of course, a very big thank you to Orientbell Tiles, without whom and who, without them, this particular platform would not have been possible. So a very big thank you to all, each and every one of you watching this program. Till we meet again for the next episode of the Icons of Creativity. Namaskar.